alternatiivsed väljakutsed Taani rannakalanduses ja ma mõtlen, nii kaua kui mõni inimene veel tuleb, ma võin rääkida ühe väikse loo sellega seoses. Just nimelt alternatiivsetest väljakutsetest. Ma olen nimelt abipolitseinik ja Ida-Harju, siis Põhjaprefektuuri Ida-Harju osas, mis on siis kõik, mis on Tartu maanteest mere poole kuni Loksani. Ja mingi nädal tagasi me saime välja sellise väljakutse, et öösel pime, kell 10 mees helistab sõbrale, et on nagu vööst saati vees, ei tea kus on ja pime ei näe ka mitte midagi, purjus. Ja mis see tähendas, oli see, et Tallinnast hakkas ekipaaž sinna poole sõitma, ehk siis on Charlie kutse, vahet oht elule. Õnneks kuskil seal Kaberneeme otsas me pöörasime otsa ringi, sest et vend oli tee välja leidnud. Aga ehk siis veekogudega seotud kõikvõimalikud päästeoperatsioonid on ka ilmselt, kus siis rallakalamehed on esimesed, kes vähemasti teavad neid kohtasid ja kõike muud sellist. Et meie esimene oli see, ekipaažid hakkasid sinna poole sõitma ja juba hakati uurima, et droonivõimekus ja asju, et tegelikult inimest reaalselt otsima hakata siis seal kuskil mingi veekogu peal. Et aga õnneks see inimene siis pääses välja, aga nagu me näeme, on ka selliseid teistsuguseid väljakutseid siis selle nii-öelda veekogudega. Aga läheme edasi meie siis järgmise ettekandjaga. Teemat ma juba tutvustasin. Nagu tuleb Taanist ja nimeks on Helle Breindal. Helle, the floor is yours. You have about 45 minutes. So please use about 40 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes then we can have different questions and discussion. Okay. Thank you for coming and welcome to Estonia.
Thank you. Wow, I had a lot of things on my head here. I'll try to sort it out. Okay. So good to see you all back from lunch again. This is by far the worst part of the day to be a presenter in any event because it's just after lunch. You're full, you're tired. I'll try to keep you awake. So I'm going to speak about fishery in Denmark, specifically small-scale coastal fisheries. I am by no means an expert, but I'm really glad for the invitation. I hope I can provide you some insights into what we are doing in Denmark. And as this is from a flag perspective, I've been a flag manager for more than 8 years now, so this is not probably the comprehensive picture of Danish coastal fisheries, but it is what it looks like from our perspective. So, first I'm going to get rid of some of the boring stuff, so let's look at a few numbers. Really get you in the mood after lunch. So this is for overall employment in fisheries in Denmark. So for almost a 10-year span, you see the amount of people employed in fisheries here went from about almost 2,800 people employed in fisheries in 2008. In 2017, that number had declined to 2,300. Number of people employed in the sector, 2008, again, 4,300, almost 4,400 people. 2017, again, a decline to about 3,600 people. So this is just to say that overall, the amount of people working in the sector is declining. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are not making as much revenue. I couldn't find those numbers for you, but it's just to say overall fewer people employed in fisheries and in the sector overall. If we now look at just the small-scale coastal fisheries, there are now in 2018 or last year about 250 vessels in that small fleet. So that is a very small part of the overall percentage of people employed in fisheries, because there are normally only maybe 1 to 3 people working on a small scale vessel. These numbers are not necessarily completely accurate, because these are fishers that are in the small scale coastal fisheries scheme, if you call it. There can be other boats that just don't register as small scale. There are a lot of different reasons for that. Anyway, this is where my flag is situated. So this is a map of Denmark and a good portion of Sweden as well. But so we are right here on the nose of the peninsula called Jutland. We cover this area and we have 2 main harbors. You see Bønderup up here and Grenaa. I'll tell you a little bit more about some numbers about us later on. But we are the only flag situated from just about up here all the way to the bottom of Jutland. So there are not really any other flags nearby. We have in Denmark, particularly a lot of fishery on the west coast of Jutland. A few very big ports there. also some on Funen on Zealand, but overall the main part of the Danish fisheries sector is on the west coast of Jutland. So this is where we are, a small area. This picture was taken probably right around the time that I was born. It's from Grenaa Harbor. It's approximately, it's from an archive, so I can only tell you with 10 years accuracy. It was taken between 1975 and 1985. So this is a picture of Grenaa Harbor during a storm. So you see it's completely packed with small fishery vessels. Now this is a picture I took a few days ago, or actually I got one of my board members to take. It's the same angle, it's the same actual harbor, it's just 2019. And even though this was not on a stormy day, so some of the vessels may have been out to sea, I think it, if we go back again, it kind of illustrates the difference. You see this building here in the back, still standing over here, just a lot more room in the harbor. So I don't know for sure, but I would guess that this is a picture that you can sort of recognize from your own areas as well. This is sort of the way, so this was to illustrate this is what is happening with our small coastal fleet, at least in my area. So some hard facts about flag Djursland. We have, with the area we cover, there are about 37,000 inhabitants. We have approximately 40 active fishers right now. This is a number that has been declining for a while. I can't give you any hard facts as to what it used to be, but this is about the amount we have now. I can say that for the 8 years that I've had this job, I must have constantly been failing, because I think there were about 10 more when I started, but this is sadly the way of the work. We have, as I said, 2 active harbors. We have funded 12 different projects since 2016. So in this current program period, we were up and running in 2016. We have given out grants for a total of 490,000 euros. So these are all grants that are approved, but not necessarily paid yet. 6 of these 12 projects are completed and paid. 6 are still running. Actually, one of the 6 that are running is actually completed, but not paid yet. That can take quite a bit of time to get the funds actually paid. We have 6 directly, what I would call directly fisheries related projects, so that are directly support to fishermen or to the local harbors. We have then 3 projects in seaweed and 3 in what I would call food and gastronomy. So this is our overall, what the picture looks like of what we've been doing so far. And this is pretty much in line with our strategy, which was to spend about 50% of our funds on coastal fisheries, about 25% on tourism, food, and then about 25% on seaweed and or other forms of diversification. So, more pictures. What are the challenges? Well, primarily it's the decreasing number of active small vessels, and that means fewer active small-scale fishermen. Also, we have a very high average age among fishers. I can't tell you what it is for sure, but a lot of them are close to retirement. And with the current system of quotas and being able to change quotas, it also means that when a fisherman retires, often his quota disappears. So when a small-scale fisherman decides to retire, his quota might be bought from a very big fishing boat vessel somewhere else, so that part will sort of disappear from the small-scale fisheries. We have low or no competition in buying up the catch. So when you land your catch on shore, what will happen, or in the harbor, what will happen is that you go to the one buyer that's on the harbor, and he basically sets the price. Used to be there were 2 buyers. One went out of business, now there's only one, so he basically sets the price for the fish. And this is a huge issue for the fishermen. Nonetheless, it's just the way it is, so it's difficult for us to change for them. We have the quotas, as I mentioned. They also, because they dictate what type of fish we can catch, it's not necessarily corresponds to what is still in the sea. Seals and cormorants, as you've talked about too, it's an issue for us as well. And I think they are a bigger issue here in the Baltic Sea. And where you saw where I was is sort of at the end of the Baltic Sea, but they're migrating. So it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, especially with the seals. Another issue for us is that we have different interests in the harbors as well. For Bønderup, it's a very small harbor, but there's a fisheries harbor, and right next to it, there's a leisure yacht club harbor. And those two have merged, so they have to make joint decisions, which is actually a really good thing. But they're just, the interests are not always aligned. What you want for your yacht club, your nice leisure boats, your nice summer holiday is not necessarily the noise and smell of an active fisheries harbor. That's one. The other, Grenaa, is a huge harbor with a lot of industry. So offshore windmills, sometimes oil rigs, a lot of different industry. And also the municipality is looking to develop this harbor into something more interesting for tourism, which is, again, a good thing, but just becomes a problem because then the interest of the fishers are not really taken into account. They're just seen as, well, if you wait long enough, they'll probably disappear on their own, which I hope will not be the case. Okay, so how many of you are still awake? Can you just raise your hand? Good, thank you. I'll try to be more fun. This is a lovely picture of me being frustrated, which sometimes happens in this job, because I think another challenge that I didn't want to put on the slide is that fishers tend to be very conservative, for lack of a better word. They like things the way they used to be. And when they talk about how it used to be, we usually get back to that picture of right around the time when I was born. And I often tell them, sorry, I would love to, but we can't go back in time. We can't change it. The facts are what they are. The quotas are what they are. So this is me going, listen, what can we do different? So what can we do facing the challenges that are there? So we can't necessarily change the starting point for where we are, but we can change how we deal with it and how we respond. So that's what we've been trying to do in my flag. So here are some of the things we've been looking at. So alternative sales channels. So instead of just complaining about the one buyer who basically has a monopoly, let's try to see if we could sell directly to consumers. We're quite close to the second largest city in Denmark. There are some high-end restaurants there that are really interested in good locally caught fish. There could be closer markets, because what happens to at least the most expensive types of fish we land is that they're put on a big truck and driven to Germany, because people in Germany, in Hamburg especially, will pay a higher price than the direct buyer. But that might not be the case if we could reach local consumers and tell the great story about how this is a locally caught delicious fish or whatever. So that's something we've been looking into. Branding, like telling the story. I think someone over here earlier asked a question about whether businessmen are necessarily fishermen, or whether fishermen are necessarily good businessmen. I don't think it's in every one of their natures to think about branding and how to tell a story. So this is something we will try to help them with, because a lot of them actually have a very good brand. I think there's been a huge movement, at least in Denmark, over the last decade or so in food, about how to sell and brand local food, the local produce, that whole story of the single farmer doing this very, very nice stuff with his product. And actually a lot of the fishers have a similar story. So we should tell that. Then there's diversification. So looking at other ways we could use or utilize the sea, all the resources that are in there. Seaweed has been a big thing for us and something we're really focused on, because we have a lot of it, there's a lot of access to it, and there's a lot of potential sales channel for it. And finally, tourism. In the broadest sense of the word, there's a lot of tourism potential just being near the water. So, having said that, I'm going to show you some examples of some projects. Try not to let you fall asleep. So I'd like to introduce you to some people. This right here is Espen. He's one of my new favorite people in the world. He's a very young, very smart, very talented guy. He's a researcher, a bioengineer. Actually, he trained to work for big, like medical companies, but then he decided he thought they were evil. He wanted to do his own thing instead, so he started his own business called Pure Algea. And algae is just another fancy word for seaweed, basically. So what they are going to do is they're going to make Denmark's first commercial land-based seaweed cultivation system. So they are taking seaweed, or they're taking salt water from the sea, pumping it into a controlled environment, then growing seaweed, initially for consumption right now. Because they can do it controlled in a closed environment, they can make a clean production, they can secure high quality, they can secure food quality, and they can also secure optimal growth. Another part of this is that what they've found out is that it's actually it's less of an impact on the environment doing it onshore instead of offshore. So this is, and it has a lot of different potential as well. They just got approved for funding a few months ago. It's one of the highest grants we've ever supplied, of 100,000 euros. But the call from my board, the reason they wanted to support this was because this is by far the most interesting, innovative project we've ever seen. So they decided this is the one. If we really want to go big on seaweed, this is the guy to back. And also we thought it would be pretty cool to put our stamp on it, hoping that it works. I will say, before we gave this grant, he had already made a nice prototype, which we saw and we visited and we checked out, saw all the numbers. I'm by no means a biologist, so this is not something I'm an expert in. But as I'm told, one of the reasons this is really cool is also that seaweed, this particular brand, it's called sea salad basically in Denmark, has a very high potential to also clean water. So it will take up to 45 tons of biomass per acre. It will absorb 3 tons of nitrogen and 67.5 tons of CO2 per acre. So it has a huge potential to clean water. One of the things they're looking into doing is taking this production facility, one of the prototypes, you can put it as an add-on to, for instance, an aquaculture or a fish farm. If you have a fish farm on land, they tend to produce a lot of polluted water. If you put one of these prototypes basically on the end of that, you can then clean the water a lot better than you do now, and also reduce CO2. So we're hoping this succeeds. They're already very well on their way, and they have a lot of attention locally and nationally in Denmark for being a very different kind of project. Then I'd like you to meet Frank over here, also a good friend. His project is also on seaweed, but just offshore instead of onshore. What we helped him do was fund basically the equipment he needed to extend his business. He used to be a mussel and fisherman. So he used to do line mussels, but he also used to do traditional fishery on the west coast of Jutland. And then he went into cooperation with Danish University and the Danish Center for Seaweed. And they had a research facility out in the ocean, and they were looking for someone to help them harvest the seaweed. So basically, this is a former fisherman who's now found employment doing almost exactly what he did before, going out to sea, being alone, I guess, and loving it, and then just pulling seaweed out of the water instead of pulling out nets. So he is also just about done with his project. The seaweeds had been, what do you call it? Planted? Don't know what that is. Put out on the lines. They were just about ready to harvest in about, during the summer, there was spring and summer, there will start. So we don't necessarily know the effects of this project yet, but it's definitely creating at least half a full-time job for Frank himself. Hopefully, down the line, will create even more employment. Yeah. No, they're different. But in the sea salad, they can actually do different kinds of seaweed. They're just starting with one they call sea salad because that seems to be the one that has the most exponential growth Initially, they can do different types. I have no idea what that's called in neither English nor Latin, that kind of seaweed, but it's not the same. What shills it? This is, again, why I'm not an expert. I'm good at maybe helping people get funding, not necessarily good at understanding what they call the different things they do. But anyway, this was Frank. Now, here we have Ellen. He is a local fisherman, small scale, has been for many, many years. His family has been for generation. Now, he decided to change from actual traditional net fishing and to line fishing with hooks for cod. He was funded with about 37,000 euros. He has already completed the project. He was really fast, and he has. So once you complete the project, that means once you finish making your investment, usually you apply for the grant paid immediately because it takes quite a while. So from the reports we get when the operation is completed, they usually have quite conservative numbers for effects because they've just finished. So he finished about a year ago, and he said that he had created about, I think he said one full-time, the equivalent of one full-time job. Now, about a year later, there are at least 3 people employed, including himself, though, on this vessel. So they're still homebound in one of our harbors. What they do is then they often sail far away and come back. But to us, that doesn't necessarily matter that much. I mean, we would love to have as many boats in the harbor as possible, but the most important thing is that he returns, that we are his safe base, and that he continues to have a thriving business. Then I'm supposed to say something about what comes next. I wish I knew. Are there any good fortune tellers in here? No. So this is the 4th and final person I'd like you to meet. This is Per. I've known him for 8 years now. I think I've traveled around Europe mentioning him, or also brought him to Finland once. He's been the chairman of the Fishermen's Association in this local Bønderup harbor for many, many years. It took me at least 3 to 4 years to earn his trust. I now think I have it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I can solve his problems for him. But my point is, as you can maybe tell, he's a little gray. He's close to retirement. He might not be in business still to go beyond 2020. And this is the case with a lot of the fishermen we know. What will happen as far as flags? I'm not even sure that my area will have a flag in the next program. Depends on it's all up to the member state. How do they want to distribute the money? How do they want to do the geography? I hope we will, but to be honest, I'm optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. I'm optimistic in the sense that I think there's still a lot of room for some things to be done that could change where we are now, from where we could go. There's a lot of room for improvement. Like I said, there's a lot of opportunity. But the problem is also, at least in my opinion, that we don't necessarily have enough strength, enough muscle to, like financially, time-wise, to make that change, to make that shift. And the fishermen don't have that time or the resources for that themselves. So, for something to go on, at least beyond 2020, or maybe even to go beyond 2030 instead, because if we just sit on our hands and do nothing, the fishery will keep declining. In 10 years, we won't have any small-scale coastal fishery to mention in my area. That's just the facts. So, on the other hand, a bit more optimistic, now is the time to act. We still have an active fishery. We still have 2 active harbors. As I showed you before, we have people with good ideas. So those 2 are in Seaweed. We still have good active fishermen as well. So I think that is going to be what I'm going to say, and then you can ask questions if you want to. Now you all look terrified. Thank you.
Nii, on meil Taani loo kohta täiendavaid küsimusi. On midagi Eestisse üle võtta, näeme midagi asja sarnaselt.
Ahto Oja, Eesti Farneti geograafiline ekspert. I ask in English. For the seaweed, they use all the seaweed for the food, or they will also make some other products. The question behind is, can they use the kind of press cake from seaweed for other things, for example, biogas production? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for most of them, and initially for the first project, the purification with water as well, they have a lot of different possible species, but also lines of investigation. So what we advised them to do, and they had other businesses advice as well, was to get the plant, if you could call it that, get it up and running, and start with the one thing that is secure. Because we know we can see out there's a big market for buying that, so that's where they start. But there are also a lot of different, so there's consumption, but there's also all these different types of, again, not expert on what's it called, but there are all these good things in seaweed that you can use for medicinal purposes, or you can use for people who want to be super healthy, want to eat some supplement to the diet that's extracted from seaweed. We have another business in our area as well that does a lot of seaweed pestos, a lot of organically certified seaweed products, all for consumption. So it's a lot of consumption. We also have some that are looking into cosmetics as well. So it's a wide range, broad palette of things that we could potentially do.
On veel küsimusi?
Oh, good. I didn't put you all to sleep.
Yes, thank you. Erkki Tuus from the Ministry of Environment. My question is, or actually request is, perhaps you can describe your fishermen and their income related to the average salary in Denmark, and how much they earn from fisheries and how much they earn from, I don't know, something else they do. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't give you specific numbers, but I can say I think on average fishermen actually make quite a good living. They're pretty much on a par with, say, average, maybe a bit below average for Danish. That's also maybe even sort of a challenge for at least getting young people to go into fisheries, because there's so many different options in Denmark. So it's not that people won't be able to find a job if they don't go into fisheries. So the motivation to seek it out might not be as high. It used to be that fishermen were quite high income, not top 10% wealthy, but it used to be you made a really good living being a fisher. Now you just make, I'd say, a decent living. So does that answer your question? Yes. The fishers that are active are 100% fishers. We have a few that use it as sort of a buy income, but mostly it's their main livelihood.
Thank you. Kaire Martin, also from the Ministry of the Environment. Just a question on the seaweed cultivation. Do you also cooperate with the local aquaculture farms in order to mitigate the pollution they produce? Is there a direct link, I mean?
There is a direct link, but not to local, but only because we don't have any local farms, aquaculture farms. We have some on the West Coast, and they're closely cooperating with them right now to see if we can, if this is actually going to work. I mean, because it's one of those things that when you look at it on paper, it looks completely brilliant, but now we need to test it in, not just in theory, but in practice as well, to see if it will give the same results. But so yeah, that's underway.
On veel küsimusi?
Hello, Erko. Don't laugh.
I was so confused. Yes, good. Thanks.
About your
project examples. Most of them were about seaweed. To see that coastal fishing is in 10 years like only about seaweed in Denmark, or are there any fish catching fisheries also?
In Denmark, no, will not be about seaweed, for sure. In Djursland, I forgot to bring my fortune-telling, you call it, sphere you look into, you can tell the future. I can't say for sure. I can say that it's the primary viable alternative, and also the at least in my opinion, one that has the same qualities as being a fisherman. So if you want to attract the same people, you have a job that's very similar if you harvest seaweed. But I hope we'll still have normal coastal fisheries. But it depends on so many factors. But for now, I'd say the prognosis in 10 years, yes, we'll still have active small-scale fishery for fish and not just for seaweed. But I mean, let's meet in 10 years and discuss.
On veel huvilisi küsimusi? Kui ei, siis thanks a lot. Thanks for coming to Tallinn.
Thank you. Of course.